IPS is a progressive research organization that works on behalf of social movements, both here in America and around the world. Over the years, we've worked in concert with a number of social movements that are based in Africa, or organizations that are based in America that are working on behalf of African social movements. So it's truly a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Part of the reason we've done some of this work is because of the one and only, the great Amira Woods, who was at IPS for a long time. She's now an associate fellow. She's a former director of foreign policy and focus at IPS, a longtime mentor to me, and just an incredible thinker, organizer, and an advocate, and a key part of why IPS has been involved in this work at all. I also want to acknowledge IPS's longstanding relationship with the Advocacy Network for Africa, Africa Faith and Justice Network, Africa Great Lakes Network, and Friends of the Congo. Again, a lot of the reason why we've been able to work with these fantastic groups is because of the one and only Amira Woods. I know that I think Stephen Rogers of the Advocacy Network for Africa will be moderating this conversation. I hope I'm not mistaken, Stephen, when I say that you are just, I think, a year into your tenure there, and I've heard great things about the work that you're doing. Welcome to IPS. Again, I wish I were there with you. I've wanted to sort of interact with you for quite some time, and I hope that we're able to do that soon. But yes, thanks once again to all of you for coming. And I will now pass the mic to Stephen Rogers.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for welcoming everyone here. Good afternoon and good evening, good morning, wherever you are. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this very, very important event. And to welcome these very two distinguished and frankly, very, very inspiring personalities. Both of them will share their stories as while they are unveiling a very important book. Before we start, let me just briefly state that this event is co-sponsored by different organizations who normally work together. This includes the Advocacy Network for Africa, which has already been introduced, the Africa Faith and Justice Network, where I work as the executive director, the African Great Lakes Action Network, the Africa World Now Project, the Black Alliance for Peace, Friends of the Congo, and the Institute for Policy Studies, where we are actually hosting this event. Now, it is my privilege. I want to just introduce the two folks who are actually going to take us through this discussion. I really don't have a lot of work to do here today. On my left, I have Mr. Claude Gatebuke. He's probably very well known by so many people who've been following the Rwandan genocide, and he's a well-inspiring figure. He's the co-author of the book that we are about to discuss here, Survivors Uncensored. And he's also the co-founder and executive director of the African Great Lakes Action Network. He's a peace activist, and he's an expert in Africa's Great Lakes regions in socio-political matters. So without much ado, I am going to just open up this floor and ask him to start this conversation.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
And before Claude just continues, I wanted to also acknowledge, and we also have here Dismas, and we also have Salome. So these are two very two important. I'm pretty sure you are joining us online, and you're welcome. So with that, Claude, you can take the floor.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you to all the organizers for giving us the space and the platform, and for continuing to spread these untold stories. And it's a great honor to be here with my co-authors, actually, Eric Goga, who is in the audience, and Delphine Yandamuso, who's also here on stage. The book itself was a lot of work, but Delphine's going to talk a little bit about that and why it's difficult to get these stories out. Many of you, or if any of you are familiar with dictators, they don't like the truth. They don't like people telling inconvenient, unpopular truths. And what we have in this book is a collection of stories of people who live the stories, like myself, like Delphine, like many others. There's over 100 of the stories in here. But we're here in Washington, D.C. And so I want to talk about what does this have to do with us? Before I do that, though the books focus on the genocide in Rwanda, the pre-genocide period, which there were many atrocities committed by the current ruling RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame, and then many atrocities during the genocide and post-genocide, both Rwanda, but also Congo, because what happened is when the genocide ended in Rwanda, the war that set off the genocide that started in 1990 was exported into the Congo. But this isn't just Africans butchering Africans. This isn't the story that we hear of African tribalism, where folks are just based on tribal divisions are going out and killing others. There are many players. There are definitely local players, the ones who are holding the guns and the machetes and the hoes and all of these tools to kill. But it's also connected regionally, because when the war in Rwanda started, it was an invasion from Uganda, led by Yoweri Museveni, who is, again, what does this have to do with us? He is a puppet of the West. Him and Paul Kagame are both puppets of the West. They're the local mercenaries for the US, the UK, the EU, and what they did basically was, and actually multiple Western leaders like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair have spoken about them in glowing terms, calling them the beacon of hope. And these are people who have actually butchered millions of people, millions of African people in one of the most important parts of the world, not just Africa. In the Congo, we've lost more than 6 million people. So the original players are the Ugandan dictator, Yoweri Museveni and his ruling NRM, and Paul Kagame and the RPF in Rwanda, who today, as we speak, as we're sitting here, are actually causing chaos in the Congo. Almost 1 million people have been displaced since last year as a result of the additional and the additional activities and invasions of the Congo. Now, how do they get the resources and who supports them? How do they get away with it? Again, as I said, both are allies of the US. And so the US provides them with military training. They provide them with budget support, economic support, budgetary support. They provide them with diplomatic cover and political cover to get away with these crimes. When you think about people like, for example, Robert Mugabe, and the way he was demonized in Western media, and Muammar Gaddafi, and those and you know, they were in power for 40 years, and nobody should be in power for that long, in my opinion. But they could earn PhDs in abusing human rights and killing people in masses and different ways of killing people for the benefit of Western multinationals than anybody that has been demonized in Western media. So again, the connection is global. And then beyond that, there's also the economics. The Congo is the richest country in natural resources. A lot of the things that we use, the coltan in the phones that we have, the lithium that is used now, and the gold, and so many of the resources, including actually farming and so many other things that actually could serve the world in a positive way and uplift the people all over the world, not just on the continent of Africa, is being looted, is being plundered. And the gateway to the plundering are the regional players, who are the Musevenis and the Kagames. And of course, we had the Kabilas in the Congo. But I want to stop there. I just wanted to make that connection with us here in Washington and the region and the conflict itself. And then Delphine and the others could also speak about, you know, what's happening and their experiences.
Thank you you so much, Mr. Getty-Booker. And that's a really good way of opening the discussion. I didn't want to really provide a background into the story because what you're going to listen to for the next hour and a half is really, really personal testimonies. And one of the things you said was, this is raw data. It's almost like when you're doing research, the information you get, and you can analyze it the way you want. And we have two people here who generally you would refer to as people who are on the war front, who are on the ground. Now, it is my privilege to welcome our I have Delphine Yanda Mutso. She's a co-author of the book that we are talking about, Uncensored, and she's a co-founder and a data collection officer for Rwandan Accountability Initiative, RAI. She will speak about the book, and also she will speak about her testimony. So to you, Delphine, if you can have an opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here. So like you just said, my name is Delphine Andamuto. I was born in Rwanda. I'm currently based in Sydney in Australia. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys in Sydney, in Washington. And it's amazing to have you guys here. So about the book, it was a long process because this way, I think maybe I should start with my own testimony, then it would make more sense when I talk about the process of putting these stories together. Obviously, my story is long, like I think as most of Rwandans or most of people from the region, actually, our stories are so long, but in short, as the stories we talk about here, they go before 94, because sometimes when we talk about Rwandan genocide, people think about 1994, but the atrocities started a little bit before. So in 1990, I was young, I was 6, so I didn't know what was happening really. And the wall or the killings were not that close to where I was. In 1994, that's when things became real. And my family and I were living in the capital of Rwanda, Kigali, and things were far until they came close to us, when actually bullets were falling in our front yard, and people were starting to move, obviously going anywhere away from the bullets. And we had to flee. We went towards Congo, so through Kisenyi towards Congo, and that journey, obviously, that was long because we had to go through so many checkpoints, and our parents had to do what they had to do to go through. And I remember we stayed in Goma for a short while, and there was, what I can remember, there was like so many dead people on the road, like literally on the line, like in big numbers. We did not stay there for too long, and we went to stay in a residential area in Ruchuru. Not for so long, because there was, campaigns that I didn't understand then, but now I got to understand that it was campaigned by Rwandan government, where they needed everyone to get out of the residential areas to go live in refugee camps. So we lived in a refugee camp called Katale Refugee Camp. And we kind of almost everywhere we stopped, we had to start afresh. So I remember we had to go to school. It was just open space, sitting under trees sometimes when it's too sunny. And but they didn't last for long either. The camps were destroyed. So the RPF invaded Congo and they destroyed the camps. And that was the start of another chapter, another one that it's so hard to describe, but I would probably describe that night. So they strategically destroy, like attack the camps during the night. I think was to minimize the casualties. So that during the night, I remember hearing the bullets, hearing you don't know where they're coming from. It's in the middle of the night. We could see they look like fire, like in the air, and bombs coming from everywhere. And just that chaos, that people not knowing where to go, not knowing what to take, not knowing like what's happening. So it came out of nowhere, and we had to run anyway away from the bullets, because as they coming closer, we had to run. And we end up in the jungle. And people who know Congo, they have beautiful big forests. As a kid, it was massive for me. I can't even describe how that was feeling. We went through that. We were being followed. People were killed, people would die of thirst, of hunger, of, you know, you name it. And I can remember I saw my family was my mom, my dad, and 4 children. And I remember sort of being together and then being separated, like on and off, until we eventually lost my older brother. Until now, we don't know what happened to him. And at some stage, we lost my dad as well. So it was just my mom and 3 children, 3 young children, my older sister, my younger brother. And going through that, it's obviously it's a long story in terms of, like, there was a time where we were thirsty. There was no water to drink. And one of the things I remember, we had to, I don't know how the parents or the older people knew that some trees that they had roots that were, you know, they had something that looked like water, or we would chew on them just to survive, those kind of things. But that's how we were surviving. I cannot tell exactly how many days we were in that forest, but sometimes you go and you can notice that you were definitely there. You've been going around. So anyway, at some stage, my mom realized that, you know, this mom in the middle of nowhere with 3 children, we had separated with dad, separated with my brother. She had to choose, you know, either continue running, she didn't know where to go, or to try to return to Rwanda. There were some people who were like refugees. That's how we made our way back to Rwanda. And I guess thinking that was the end of the chaos. The way we had to go to a place where my dad was born, and it's in the northern of Rwanda. And that was around 1996, 1997. So that was not the end of the war, because in 1998, there was an insurgency that came in that area in the north, and we had to run again. And that's one of the things that I'll never forget, because at that time, there was a time when it was just me and my younger brother, like these 2 children who are running, we didn't know where to run to. And one of the things that is always stuck, it's stuck in my mind, is when we had to say that, look, we've been running, we've been fighting each other and everything, but we knew that being separated was actually a thing. And we sort of made a deal like, look, we cannot be separated, And we agreed that we had to always hold hands and we would run, you know, so that's what we did. We could not stay in our home because the houses were targeted and people were coming in the middle of the night, and in the morning someone is dead or some things happened. So I cannot even describe how that period was. And, you know, I don't know how we survived, but, you know, here I am. Not too long. So we had to leave that area, and my mom came, and my sister. So she realized that, you know, it was not safe to stay in that region. And that's we moved again to the capital city, and we started again, tried to start a life again, and to study, and to learn how to live a normal life. And long story short, in 2007, I moved to Australia. So the story is long, but it's in a book here. And sometimes when we're talking, it's like we are living what will happen, you know. It's hard, but I believe that there is a reason why we survived, and we did not survive to be silenced. That brings me to the book. So the process of putting this book together was not easy, because you guys can imagine the perpetrators, the people who chose those camps, the people who killed millions of Rwandans and Congolese. They are in power, the RPF, and they do not want us to tell these stories. I remember, just going back a little bit, when we came from Congo, as a child, I could not understand why I had literally just lived something, but I was not allowed to talk about it, because the people who are the authors of that, they don't want me to talk. So we had to speak with our family or friends who we knew that were in refugee camps, would talk in codes so that people don't know, so that we don't get in trouble. We had to keep quiet. And that really stayed with me for a long time, where I became quiet, and I was just choosing where to talk or who to speak to for a long time, until I got to Australia, and I sort of got to know the people who had been talking for ages. And I'm like, actually, I need to talk, or something was really on my mind. And we needed to really encourage other people to talk. So we started, talking about our stories, those ones that the RPF didn't want us to say, but they are stories, and every story matters. And as we're talking about the stories, a wonderful co-author, Eric, is like, guys, we've been talking, everyone has been talking, because when we started, everyone who had been silenced for so long was like, actually, I need to talk. I need to get my story out. And Eric came out with the idea that we needed to actually write these stories. There's so many people who are sitting on these stories. There's so many people who have survived. There's so many people who, even for the people who were lost in the way, their stories matter as well. So that's how we put this book together. It was a long process, because as you can imagine, we are 8 co-authors. We are in different parts of the world. I'm in Sydney. Now it's in the middle of the night in Sydney. And these guys are in America. It's different times. We had guys in Africa, guys in Europe. So it was hard, just the process, the physical process of doing that. But also the stories, they're so heavy. They're so emotional. And most of us that we can relate to one thing or the other, or all of it. So it was a process. We had to work and then pause and cry and debrief, and yeah, it was a long journey, but we knew that it was worth the trouble, because our stories matter, and we need, if we are able to talk, for example, for our people, for my brother who did not survive, his story is in here. For all those people who are unable to talk, people are still running. People in Congo, in refugee camps, in the forest, who are still running, their stories matter. So that's how we put this together, and with a lot of, I can't even describe it. Yeah. So, but that's the short of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Delphine. Thank you. It's, I really admire, both of you. Talking about, these are very horror stories that you probably, every time you write about them or you speak about them, you literally relive on them. And as someone who grew up in a country where there is war and some of these things that I can relate to, running away from your country, I cannot imagine myself sitting down recalling them. And I think you said something which I really talked about. It's not really linear, where you think, you go ahead and then you realize there's something you've forgotten, because the status of being a refugee is like, there's so much things that happen around the same time that you really can't recollect in one full story. Now, what I want to do is, we have 2 additional speakers who are online, and they're probably going to join. They're going to make their 2 short contributions, and then we are probably going to go more deep into the book itself in terms of your experiences, as well as talking about some of the things that you initially introduced. So I wanted to just welcome, and I'm assuming this person is online. We are going to welcome Salome Ayuak. Salome, are you online? Yes, so Salome is online. Hi. So let me introduce. Hi, Salome, welcome. Salome is, let me briefly. Salome is it's a BAP Africa team. She belongs to the BAP Africa. Just a little bit about the militarism, imperialism, and its ties to the conflicts in the region and the continent. So basically, she's going to go a little bit outside that, and then we'll come back to the actual specific stories on the book in terms of real experiences. Salome, if you don't mind, you're welcome. You can just get an opening statement right there. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me here today. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Hi, as mentioned, my name is Salome, and I'm part of the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team. And one of our beliefs at the Black Alliance for Peace is really the idea around people-centered human rights. And I believe it connects strongly to this event. The approach of people-centered human rights reminds us that human rights did not begin in Europe or with the UN. And these stories that y'all have shared through the books and just now, I think help remind us that we are far from that, from reaching a full people-centered human rights, but it is also like a very African it's a very African tradition, right, to move towards that. And it's not something that we look to Europe or the UN for. And one of the most important elements of people-centered human rights, in the words of Ajama Baraka, is that we don't beg for authorities for the rights or wait for their intervention. We self-determine our futures, and we understand that imperialism is a direct threat to the full realization of human rights. It puts our day-to-day lives at the helm of the West, as demonstrated in the stories. And it also impacts everything from what we're able to do daily, to the food we eat, to the very air that we breathe. The impacts of imperialism lead to so many ecological suffering. And something else that I think is important to mention is that our fight towards people-centered human rights as Black African peoples, because our struggles are so interconnected, as Claude mentioned in the beginning, like what happens in Congo, what happens in Rwanda is very much tied to what is happening in Uganda, et cetera, et cetera. Our fight towards more liberated futures requires all of us. And in the case of Rwanda, specifically the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or the RPF, a direct example, was armed and trained by neighboring Uganda, which continued to supply them throughout the Civil War. But like an important question as anti-imperialist is who supplies Uganda? And it's the US. And so whenever we look at these atrocities, it's always important to look at where the weapons are coming from, where the money's coming from, who's supporting who. And during this period, officials who were based in the US Embassy in Kampala, Uganda, they knew that the weapons were crossing borders. The CIA knew that there were growing military strength, et cetera, and escalating tensions. But as Claude mentioned in the beginning, what did Washington do? Washington paraded Museveni as some peace hero, right? Even gave him space to speak at the University of Minnesota. They reward these puppets, right? At the expense of Black African peoples. And so I also want to highlight that this isn't new. So the relationships that these different countries within the Great Lakes and the Horn of Africa region play is not new. It's been like this since the inception of Uganda, right? Since the creation of Uganda by the British, Uganda has played the role of being basically the police state within the region. If you look at every single conflict within the Great Lakes region, within the Horn of Africa, you will find its traces back to Uganda. And when you find its traces back to Uganda, it's the US is right there, because the Uganda in itself does not have the power to wreak this much havoc in the region without the resources that are funneled in from the West.
Thank you.
And then something else that I wanted to mention is that these struggles are not disconnected. So for example, right now I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and today there is a vote for this police military training ground that takes out entire forests. And these police are being trained to utilize similar weapons that they use in regions like the Congo, like Rwanda, like Uganda, et cetera. And so as Black African peoples, it's very important to connect our struggles. And I think part of the beauty of storytelling is that we can understand the stories. And I appreciate you all having space in the book for these stories to breathe, and also being able to be able to see that these struggles are not disconnected from one another, that we are literally fighting the same state. We are literally fighting or similar oppressors. And so the importance of like really coming together on that front, I think is important. And at the end of the day, like the people who suffer the most are like the masses of Black African peoples. And so like being really united, like through a collective, the collective of Black African peoples globally is really essential. So thank you all for sharing your stories, and thank you for having this event.
Thank you so much, Salome. Thank you. And clearly what you said is not in any way disconnected to the broader discussion about militarization. And I think your contribution is very apt, especially when you just spoke about, I just saw Stop Cop City, which it sounds like it's the hashtag that's going around now. And I was just saying, I recall yesterday, you know, I was one of the military base where they were concerned about China, and they're very connected with AFRICOM. The point is, how do they continue to militarize Africa? And my message was very clear. We don't need military in Africa. That's not the solution that we need. We need much more sustainable solutions that Africans themselves can actually provide. And I think it really speaks to this broader struggle that is not just limited to specific regions. Thank you so much for that. For our audience, if you're joining us, we have 4 distinguished guests. 2 of them are here with me. We have Claude and we have Delphine, who have written a very phenomenal book, a very moving book on harrowing stories. And you are going to share some of these your personal stories to us, and I'm pretty sure we will learn a lot from it. If you have questions, please, if you are online, please send the questions. We will ask those questions. If you have questions here in the audience, I'm going to open up very soon after one more contribution, and then you ask those questions. Did you want to say something?
You can explain to the people they can only hear you. Some people are hearing the French interpretation, they have to select English.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so if you are hearing this in French, please yeah. So switch. I think you can get that in Zoom, correct? So make sure you just go on to there's a place where it can allow you to actually language and select your language. Okay, so please, I'm pretty sure, I'm sorry for those who probably have been listening in the language that they probably don't understand. All right, so with that in mind, I am going to, I think Mr. Dismas Kitenga, he's going to be the last speaker, and then we come back to my 2 panelists here who will go more detail into the books. And let me just announce, in the final 30 minutes, there will be a book signing session wherein we'll have an opportunity to actually buy the book and get it signed by the authors themselves, and which will really be an honor to us here. Mr. Kitenga is a renowned activist for several decades. He is the president of the Lotus Group. He's based in Kisangani in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he is a member of several organizations in Africa, around the world. He will speak a little bit about the victims' efforts in pursuing justice. Mr. Kitenga, if you are on, you can just give us your opening statement, if you don't mind, briefly, and then we'll come back to our panelists. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's here. Can you hear me, Mr. Kitenga? Does he need an interpreter?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I'm here.
All right, go ahead. Say woman figure. Okay. Go ahead, Dismas. You can unmute yourself.
Tu peux te démuter, Disma? J'ai muté.
Can you hear us?
I can hear
right.
you. Yeah. Okay,
Okay,
he's on now.
Okay, sure.
Disma, tu es muté?
I'm sorry, we can get you clearly. Are you? Yeah, I think it's not on. Okay. Okay, so all right. All right, what we will do is probably we will let, while they're trying to fix their technical issues, he's muted, so he needs to unmute himself. He's on. Okay, now he's unmuted. You can go ahead, Dismas. Okay. All right. So while we're waiting for you, let me turn to you guys. Let's go a little bit more into the book. Now, the way I want to look at it is, I haven't really read the book indeed, and to be honest with you, but just the introduction of the book itself. It says it's a powerful collection of testimonies from survivors of the Rwandan genocide, which means this is really first-hand, collection. And I know you enough to know some of the experiences you've had. They're very harrowing. I can't imagine myself sitting through your conversation, let alone you sharing that information with me. But it offers very poignant insights into their experiences, and it showcases stories of resilience and humanity. Through this event, we endeavor to call attention to the need for healing, reconciliation, accountability, peace promotion. Now, tell me a little bit, Claude. I mean, I know you've said this over and over, but every time you speak, you're speaking probably to a new audience that hasn't heard these stories. From the book itself, how would you share some of these experiences that you think, for instance, nobody has had, but more importantly, that maybe has been suppressed, as Delphine rightly said, that they don't want us to hear that, or they don't want the audience to hear, and how can we learn from those experiences, if you don't mind?
Thank you. I'll start with thank you, Delphine, for sharing your testimony, and also recognizing the other co-authors that are not in the room. Some of them I've noticed they're online. So shout out to all the co-authors around the world, our co-authors around the world. But before I get into my testimony, I also want to really highlight something that Salome talked about, which is this: what we're talking about here is not just a Rwandan thing. This is connected, and it's connected all over the continent. Salome talked about Uganda being the center. Paul Kagame was trained in America. When the war started, he was in training in America as a Ugandan officer. And then they invaded Rwanda, and then they invaded the Congo, and they've invaded South Sudan, and they're involved in Somalia, and they have destabilized other countries in all over Africa. Now, when you look at the Horn of Africa, there's a similar thing. US support for the TPLF, which is rearing its head today as we speak. Again, the TPLF started a war in 2020 that killed so many people. And then the US found a way to weasel the TPLF back into relevance in Ethiopia when the TPLF was losing. This is what happens, the connection, not only to what's happening on the continent, but all the way across to US and European policies. The TPLF, when Bill Clinton and Tony Blair and the others declared Paul Kagame the beacon of hope in Africa, they also say that about Meles Zenawi, who was the microphone. Oh, is it off? Okay, thank you. This work? Better? Okay. Yeah, so the TPLF leader, Meles Zenawi, was also among the ones that they named as the beacon of hope, the visionary leaders of Africa, yet they were killing millions of Africans. We also have the same thing happening today in the Sahel, where Africans, although I have to say, shout out to our West African sisters and brothers for the resistance they're putting up. And I think they're setting an example for how we actually, in a connected way, can resist this. So back to the stories in the book, my own story. I'll be very brief, but when the war started, I was also really young, and I started seeing displaced people. At first, that's all I noticed, but people were like missing limbs. There were so many amputated people. And then there was like a terror campaign that the RPF introduced in Rwanda before the war started. I hadn't seen a weapon. I'd never seen a gun. When I saw the soldiers going to the war front, I thought somebody was shooting a movie in Rwanda, because I had never seen anything like that. The soldiers dressed like Boy Scouts before that war. And then I started seeing displaced people. We started hearing these horror stories of people being called into meetings like this. And then the RPF would surround them and throw grenades into the crowds. And whoever survived, they would kill them with hand weapons. Then some of our family members who lived in the northern part of the country actually fled. And they were like, there were so many dead bodies in the road that we had to leave the cars and actually walk, to be safe. This was before I started experiencing this. April 6, 1994. April 6 probably doesn't mean anything to anybody in this room unless it's your birthday. But for Rwandans, it's a big thing. On that day, the Rwandan and the Burundian president were shot in Rwanda. Their plane was taken down. Both of them died, and everybody on board was killed. That's what set off what is known today as the Rwandan genocide. This was on the heels of a 4-year war, where during that time, as a young boy, it would have been cheaper for me to buy a grenade than it would have been for me to buy a bottle of soda or a loaf of bread. And so Rwanda was like in a volcano waiting to erupt. And the shooting of the president is what really now set off mass killings. And with the mass killings started the extremist Hutu campaign of exterminating Tutsis. At the time, my father was not in Rwanda. He had been out of Rwanda for 2 years. And it was just me, my mother, my 2 sisters, and we went into hiding. And we would hear people in our house looking for us, wanting to kill us. And we ended up getting rescued from our house by neighbors who bundled us up and went and hid us in a neighbor's house. Again, when you go into these stories of the Rwandan genocide, it's a singular story. There's an official narrative that the RPF wants you to tell, which is extremist Hutus got up, they started killing Tutsis out of the blue, and then out of heaven came this heroic army, the RPF, and they stopped the genocide, and the Rwanda and the region and the world has been living happily ever after. But that's not true. The RPF was in the middle of all of this. They had infiltrated the militias that were committing the genocide. They've said this themselves. This is not my words. This is the words of officials of the RPF. They had been doing this for years. The RPF was gathering people in camps and massacring those people. So the RPF was more systematic and smart about how they killed people. They took them away from the crowds and they killed them in hiding. They burnt the bodies. The extremist Hutu militias, who were civilians, were just out there killing people and bodies piling up in the middle of the street. When we started fleeing from Kigali to the northern part of Rwanda, trying to get into, it's near the Congo, we were stopped at many checkpoints and almost killed at many of those. And at one of the checkpoints, they actually took me and my mother out of the truck and they made us dig our own graves. We were lucky that people came and actually they pleaded for us. We didn't know these people. So again, back to that singular story. If you listen to just the RPF, you would think every Hutu person is an evil person, every Tutsi person is a victim. That is not true. The people who saved so many people, in spite of what the RPF says, is actually Hutu people, including people like Paul Rusesabagina, who was recently abducted and recently released by, he was released under pressure by the Rwandan authorities. So these upstanders kept standing up. These are strangers, children and women that I would never recognize if I saw them in the street. And they pleaded for us, and the driver did not leave the place, although he was ordered to leave and take my 2 sisters. They didn't know my 2 sisters were on the truck. And he came back with 2 men that started pleading, and they pleaded and pleaded for hours. And eventually one of them said, this boy and his mother are not going to make it 5 miles from here. Let somebody else kill them. And somehow they agreed to it, and we left. The RPF kept bombing the country, systematically bombing people and sweeping everybody along their path. And we ended up fleeing into the Congo. This is another part they don't want you to tell. If I was telling my story, the RPF would just want me to talk about how the extremist Hutus try to kill me, but not talk about how I fled into the Congo, not talk about the atrocities they committed during and before the genocide. Then when we got to the Congo, the place was a difficult place to live. There was a description on one ABC report that said, this is the measure by which the world is going to measure humanitarian catastrophes. You can live on this land, you can die on this, you can't live here, you can die here, but you can't be buried here because it's all lava, it's volcanic rock. And so there were dead bodies everywhere, just like we had crossed in Rwanda. The lake that divides Rwanda and Congo was our source of food, source of water to drink, to shower, and to cook with. And we all got sick. So many people died of cholera. The stench that we left in Rwanda, now we made it in the Congo. Then, you know, I'm not going to get into it. Delphine has talked about it. 2 years later, the RPF invaded the refugee camps of more than 2 million people in the Congo and started massacring all of those people. And then on April 13th, 2010, Paul Kagame said in a parliament speech, he said, we went into the Congo, we killed the people we wanted to kill, and we repatriated the ones that we wanted to repatriate. So Delphine was one of the people that was taken back to Rwanda. Many of the people who were taken back were killed or are in prison serving sentences for nothing, for doing nothing, for no crimes. Those are the stories that we have in the book. So stories like mine, stories like Delphine's, stories about these people going back and suffering and going into prisons and things like that. Those are the type of stories that we have in here. But it's also stories of resilience, of hope, of, you know, we are here. You know, you tried everything that you could to silence the people you killed and to silence us from sharing these stories. But we say, to hell with it. And we are going to tell our stories. We're going to make sure the world knows. And we're going to make sure that we hold accountable the perpetrators. Those perpetrators, as I said, are not just local people. It looks good. It looks simple. It looks easy. And it's nice optics to see a Black person like Kagame, a Black person like Museveni, and all of these other ones that we talked about. There you go. Killing Black people than seeing white soldiers from the US or Europe or someplace on the continent killing people. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was Salome that said it. Oh, no, you said it. We don't need more military in Africa. We need less. We do not want weapons in Africa. We need less of those. And anybody that wants to bring these militaristic leaders is in for a fight against Africa's youth and the rest of the world that is compassionate and that wants to see peace in the world. And it starts with us sharing our stories and connecting these stories, not just being a Rwandan story, but this is a global story. This is a story of a global conspiracy against millions and millions of Africans.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. That was a powerful thing. Well, this is a really powerful statement, and it sounds like this book is full of optimism as well. You know, the story, among all the ways you analyze this, one of the things that really stood out for me is how, you know, again, this is your testimony saying, you know, not all Hutus are bad, not all Tutsis are good as they want you. People like us who are not in Rwanda would believe that the people who probably saved a lot of Tutsis were Hutus, right? So it really speaks to, you know, the way the narratives work. So we divide each other. Now, this happens first of all in the country when you have politicians who have their own motive. They divide us by how we look in terms of what we say, but also globally, you know. So some of these wars end up being proxy wars, you know, and wherein you don't put boots on the ground, but you put resources enough to give you the outcome that you desire. And then at the end of the day, it sounds like Africans, you know, barbarous tribes, gyrations of barbarous tribes killing each other, right? So you see an African killing the other because somehow one of them has been weaponized and the other one has been filled with hate for the other. And I really appreciate that. It sounds like this is real, and this is really why this book is very powerful, because it gives us an inside view of what you experience as someone, maybe a Tutsi, but seeing a Hutu saying, look, come here, you're my brother, you can't be killed, right? And that kind of interconnectedness. Now, Delphine, I wanted to come back to you. You know, I love the way you gave us your personal story, especially the journey as a refugee and going through from inter-border states and talking about, you know, having these experiences from Congo, I mean, from Rwanda to Congo. Now, these conflicts are very much linked. Having been in Australia, probably, I don't know how long, but I'm assuming for quite a while now, and understanding this conflict in itself broadly, just outside the local context, right? What would you, especially maybe that's already in the book, in terms of how would you contextualize it? Like, what do you think is the role of international actors, if you would, whether it's NGOs, whether it's, you know, international institutions, whether it's bigger powers, how would you really contextualize that for people who are probably not familiar with that to you?
So I've been residing in Australia for just over 15 years. I mean, maybe coming back to what you said before, the stories that are in here, they're not for like Hutus or for Tutsis, they're for everyone. So everyone who was courageous enough to give us permission to put their stories in here, and because that's something, because not everyone will be courageous enough to publish their stories, especially if the RPF is like, you cannot talk. So anyone who was courageous enough to do that, to speak out, their stories were here. So we did not discriminate. This is for Hutus or for Tutsis. And the stories that are in here, they, like we said, from 1990, 1994, 1998, like all those, like 1995 in Kibeho massacres, like all those stuff, even until now, people who were jailed. And those atrocities, they did not discriminate. For example, I always tell people, like, if they are shooting their bombs or grenades, they're not going to discriminate. They won't know if you're Tutsi or Hutu. So that's why every survivor has the right, has basic right to talk, to tell their stories. Every story matters. And I think that's where everyone has to start. Telling our stories, you know, without discriminating or without censoring. That's why it's called Survivors Uncensored, because with this official narrative with RPF, it's like, you can say that, but you know, when you get to the other part, can you sort of try to not give details? We cannot do that. You know, if the person has lived their stories, they need to tell them the way they've lived them. You cannot tell them, you were not there when they were surviving. So you cannot tell them how to say or what to say and what not to say. So that's a good place to start, I believe, for our stories, for every story to be told. And the international actors, they just to provide the space. So everyone, something you said before, you know, the whole system, they're probably not gonna be UN. It's not. I think it's Salome who said it. The UN or the international people, these people who are actually behind the scenes orchestrating this, they're not gonna come and say, oh, you can talk or whatever. So I think as communities or as survivors, that's a good place to start. We need to talk. We need to be fearless and speak and encourage and write it, you know, and tell our stories. And everyone's contribution is to support survivors and to try and heal. Telling stories, it will contribute to achieving, you know, justice, to achieving healing, to achieving real reconciliation. So now, when you go to Rwanda, like the reconciliation is up to 90 point something percent reconciliation, but that's not true, because one part or some people are allowed to tell their stories, but other millions are not allowed. And how can you reconcile with that? It will just be superficial, because some people are allowed to grieve, to cry, to tell their stories, others are not. That's not going to be, you know, that's not going to achieve reconciliation. So there's a lot of steps to do. And like the same as the authors of these conflicts, the same as they do from different parts, and it's all connected. So the healing or the recording or doing something about it will be connected as well. Everyone has to do something, and can connect the stories, or that to seek justice, to seek reconciliation, to seek reparation. There's a lot of things that we need to achieve through storytelling. In terms of putting our stories, like for example, in Australia, Rwandans are not many in Australia, but also even Africans in general, there are not many in Australia.
assume
We are too
it's
far
too
away
far,
from
right?
the whole world. We are so far from everyone. But you would see that conflicts, that something's happening, same as in, in Arabic countries or other countries where there's war. Something will happen so far away from Australia, and the consequences or the impact will come in Australia. I think what everyone has to do is to really listen, hear everyone else, hear others. I want to talk. I need you to listen to me, but I need to listen as well.
Mhm.
We need to support each other through that, through acknowledging everyone's experience. You cannot change it, but you cannot tell me that I didn't experience anything, or my people who died, they were less than others. So I think acknowledging the realities, giving everyone space, it's a good place to start. And as African in Australia, we try to sort of work together in terms of, for example, what happened to Rwandans is similar to, not similar, but sort of connected to what happened to Congolese, what happened to Burundians and Tanzanians, and there's some sort of connectedness, and we know how we can help each other to heal, or how we can help each other through seeking, justice and reconciliation and everything.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Delphine. Thank you. And that's true, because I really do agree to that. Reconciliation is very important. And part of that is also active listening. We want you to tell your story, but also want you to listen to other stories. I always relate my experience to some of these experiences. I'm not a Rwandese, I'm not a Congolese, but the conflicts that you face there, I lived in a place where we've seen similar conflicts, And I remember when the Sierra Leone war finished, where people's hands and limbs were cut off.
Yeah.
One of the things they did, which is the international community, was to set up a big international court in the country and use it as a research for all kinds of things, and spent $250 million. They never focused on the people that were really the victims. There was no reconciliation. There was nothing about healing. There was nothing about counseling. It was just bringing in international lawyers to sit down there and try some foreign president and spend $250 million doing that. And nothing went to the country, and all of the lawyers were from abroad. So, so it really speaks. And then they actually took the success story as well, which is what I think yourself and Claude and the other authors in this book are saying, look, the success of the war, whether it ended in Rwanda or Congo, is really your work. It's not the work of some international actor. As a matter of fact, they were really part of the perpetration. Now, if you're joining us, I have two very distinguished speakers here, and we are actually discussing Unveiling the Truth and Inspiring Change: Survivors Uncensored, launching the book. I want to open up the floor. Dismas, or is Dismas online now? Is he? Okay. Salome, and can you, okay. So Salome, if you want to, did you want to just add up to your, are you still online with us, Salome?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yes, Salome. So if you would, before I open the floor, I was going to open the floor for questions, and I'm pretty sure questions will come for you. But briefly, having listened to Delphine and as well as to Claude, what would you want to add, especially in terms of dimension of how all of these things are globally connected?
Yeah, I think the first point is what I mentioned before, which is, at the end of the day, it is the people that suffer the most, the Black African peoples that suffer the most from these atrocities. And then too, it's important to always follow the money, follow the power. What are the interests that underlie these conflicts, right? Understanding each given conflict, within its historical context, is really crucial for us if we're able to understand it fully and understand its relationships with other countries in the region, and then also more internationally and more globally. And at the end of the day, we know that the US is not there for our best interests. When they come into certain places, for example, when they came into Sudan, when they come into Congo, when they come into Uganda, even to create Uganda, right? Their interest is not there for Black African peoples. And that's something we always have to keep in mind. And I want to thank each of you for sharing your stories, and also really making sure that these stories are not censored, right? These stories, folks can actually fully breathe and fully display the complexities of what has taken place. And I even like looking at the book, I really appreciate the layout of it, because it's literally just a few pages in the beginning, like a quick, like a few words, and then at the end just a few Q&A, but then the entirety of the bulk of the book is just these stories speaking for themselves. Like there's no agendas there aside from survivors to speak for themselves. And I think that's really important. And that allows us to better understand the layers of these atrocities, and also like even see the similarities of what's happened with these narratives there in other places. Like, for example, I do a lot of work with folks in camps in Uganda. And so a lot of the stories that are there are very similar to what people go through in terms of like the paths that they have to travel, in terms of like the violence that they meet while escaping other forms of violence. And so, yeah, just thank you all for making this book possible and holding this space, and also encouraging everybody here to like draw these connections and to remember that like the US, the so-called US, the so-called France, the so-called like these Western states, they're not our friends. They're instrumental in the killing and savaging of Black African peoples everywhere. And so just keeping that in mind, like these stories are reminders of that. So thank you everybody for sharing.
Thank you so much, Salome. Thank you. And that's a very good way. And I always say, just as capping up what you said, is whatever ambition maybe the US or any other country would have with reference to Africa is far less ambitious than the potential that Africa has. And I think we should always have that in mind. Before I go to the Q&A, I know we had missed out on Mr. Kitenge. I have now been told that he's on standby. We can just let him make an opening statement briefly, and then I'll open up the floor to everyone. Maurice, okay. Oh, Maurice will speak on our behalf. Okay, Maurice, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Sorry, you're having technical difficulties with Mr. Kitenge.
No problem.
But wanted to share why Mr. Kitenge's presence was critical for today's exchange and discussion, especially seeing that we're talking about victims of the Rwandan and Ugandan governments, and particularly important are the victims of the 6-day war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo from June 5th to June 10th, 2000. And today marks the start of the 23rd anniversary of this war, this 6-day war against the people of Kisangani. And this is crucial in the whole narrative that the Rwandan government and the Ugandan government, for that matter, has spun for the past quarter century. And that is they're in the Congo because of security concerns. So-called extremists are a threat to the Rwandan government. However, during this 6-day period in 2000, we saw that instead of the Rwandan government or even the Ugandan government going after the so-called genocidaires or the extremists in the Congo, both armies fought each other. The Rwandan army fought the Ugandan army in the city of Kisangani, killing up to 1,000 people, injuring scores, all in an effort to control land and resources. So the rationale that the Rwandan government utilizes for its continued and repeated incursion in the Democratic Republic of Congo is laid bare by the victims of the 6-day war. And one of the groups that have been fighting for justice in terms of reparations is a group by the name of Lotus. Lotus Group headed up by Mr. Dismas Kitenge. And his group's efforts. The victims of the Rwandan and Ugandan invasions of the Congo been fighting for justice for over 2 decades now, and their fight was enshrined or encapsulated in a film entitled Downstream to Kinshasa by Congolese filmmaker Diodo Hamde, who's also from Kisangani himself. We will put the link in the chat for people to access the film. The film is available online from today through June the 10th. It's available in North America. So we encourage people to watch the film, to see the role that the Rwandan and Ugandan governments played in destabilizing the Congo, killing people in Kisangani, injuring scores, and that the impunity that exists around their involvement in the Congo. In addition to the film, one of our interns, Isata Diallo, has published a report on the Six-Day War to give people an update as to where we are today in the struggle for justice and the struggle for reparations on the part of the victims of Kisangani. And people can access that report on our blog at congofriends.blogspot.com. And we'll post that in the chat as well. So just wanted to share with folks the context in which Mr. Kitenge was invited. The moment we're in, the 23rd anniversary of the Six-Day War, and the fact that this war of aggression and plunder by Congo's neighbors, Rwanda and Uganda, backed by the United States in particular, and to some extent by the United Kingdom, continues to this very day. And with Claude and Delphine laying out their stories, the people of Kisangani also have testimonies as victims of this US-backed war of aggression and plunder against the Congolese people, and also the repression that we currently see in Rwanda itself. So wanted to, although Mr. Kitenge could not get on, wanted to make sure the viewing audience understand the connected stories of those who've been victimized, traumatized, and continue to suffer to this day and continue to pursue justice, that these stories must be amplified, must be shared. And for those of us who are here in the United States, it's incumbent upon us to take action. Our tax dollars are being utilized to arm, to finance, to back these leaders in the Great Lakes region, particularly Paul Kagame of Rwanda and Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. So thank you very much for providing us the opportunity to share the information about Mr. Kitenge and the victims of Kisangani. And again, downstream to Kinshasa, you can see the full film online for free until June 10th to hear the voices of the people of Kisangani who were victims of the war of aggression and plunder by the Rwandan and Ugandan armies in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, June 5th to 10th, 2000. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maurice. And thank you for that very brilliant expose. And, just a reminder, the film is on the Six-Day War in Kisangani, downstream to Kinshasa. And I also thank you for your work that you do, every day, especially asking us how we hold these very powerful men, bring them to account for the things that they have done and killed, countless number of innocent lives. And they do it every day with impunity. Thank you so much, Maurice. Now, I am going to open the floor. I know you have a lot of questions, and there are also questions on the Zoom link. So I'll first open it to the floor since you're here live, and you can ask these guests as well as the ones who are online, and then I will send it up to the ones in the chat. If you want to ask a question, is there a mic? Yes, Bahati? Did you want to? Did you want to use the mic?
Should be able to hear you.
I just wanted to thank the
the authors of this book. We know that currently the Rwandan. Okay, I already switched. Okay, hold on. Okay. Okay. Currently, the Rwandan troops are occupying a big portion of the Democratic Republic of Congo for reasons that are simply to take over the natural resources. And they are saying that they need to revise the border of the Congo. And all along, we know that they have been supported by the Western countries. But I am very interested in one of the events that happened in Rwanda, the Kibeho massacre. How can, I don't know if you have the details, but I think it's important for people to know what happened in Kibeho. Among the many massacres which I personally saw when I was in Congo, but I would like, because we are talking about Rwanda, we want to know what happened truly in Kibeho. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haji. Kibeho massacres took place on 22nd April 1995. So not many people know about those events, those massacres. So as I was saying, that people were fleeing mostly towards north, towards Congo, towards northern of Rwanda. But some people who were displaced from other parts, some of them went into Kibeho, southern Rwanda. So there was it was initially was a place of worship. So there's a Kibeho for Christians, they know Kibeho. It was it's a very famous place of worship. So people who were internally displaced into Rwanda, they went, especially from the south, from Butare, from the southern part of Rwanda, they were gathered in a camp, in a refugee camp. And, they were being supplied with, medical. So the some Australians peacekeeping were part of the people who were there. And it was mostly to provide attention to those internally displaced people, medical attention and all that stuff. And the RPF were not that far from there. And they kept trying to tell the Australians peacekeeping mission to get out of their way to take care of the refugees. And long story short, on this night, 22nd of April 1995, in Kigali, they were celebrating 1 year of, I guess, taking over Rwanda and blah, blah, blah. They were actually, one of our testimonies that we had is like, some of our friends, people, they said that they were not aware of what was happening in Kibeho because they were busy celebrating, because it was like 1 year anniversary. Anyway, on that, at the time of 22nd of April 1995, the RPF soldiers circled the refugee camps, and they shot grenades, machine guns and everything into the camps, inside the camps. And it was night, as it was sort of towards the morning. I guess this is their strategy to maximize the casualties. So they did that. They killed. So according to Australians, peacekeepers who were there, it was between 4,000 and 8,000 people who were there, who were killed at the time. According to Rwandan government at the time, they said it was 318 or something. That's what they said. Oh, it was just, just 300 people. Anyway, so that's what happened. They circled the refugees. It was mostly children and older people and women and everything. They circled them to just kill them. And the ones who survived the machine guns and the grenades, they killed them with hand weapons. And one bonus is, I guess, I was talking to, because sometimes we talk to veterans, Australian veterans, that they had put, like, there was a map of, where the graves, the mass graves that they had put these people. And when they went back, those people were not there. So the map they had, in terms of this is what happened, the stories that they've written, because they've witnessed it, they were even threatened that if you do anything, we're gonna kill you as well. So those things, those testimonies are there, not only from the survivors. There's not many survivors, so there's really limited story, written stories. but also the veterans, Australians, peacekeepers, they were so traumatized. Some of them were silenced because they were told you cannot talk about what happened there, especially cannot give full details of what happened. I don't know if that answers that, or if you want to add anything to that. Yeah.
I want to add something. Story number 53 is actually by a survivor of the Kibeho massacres. It really just talks about how they gathered the weapons and everything and how they massacred them and how he was able to survive, but the rest of his family did not make it. And in story number 72, the survivor who talks about like his journey from before the genocide, through the genocide to post-genocide, crossing the Congo all the way to Gabon, getting kidnapped from Gabon, taken back to Rwanda, kidnapped by one of the generals who is involved in the Congo, General Charles Kayonga, who was also involved in the shelling of Kigali, where we fled. Today, one of the leaders, by the way, the speech that Kagame said, we went to the refugee camps and we killed the people we wanted to kill, and we repatriated the ones we wanted to. It was part of promoting this general. And so the story number 72 is probably one of the stories that actually have so much covered, but it also has a little bit of the Kibeho massacre. I also want to add a little bit of connection to the Congo. 1995, April 22nd, 1995 is when the Kibeho massacre took place. On April 22nd, 1997, near Kisangani, we're talking about Kisangani, in Kasese, there was a massacre. And that massacre was the RPF celebrating the 2-year anniversary of the massacre they committed 2 years before in 95. So they said, okay, you know what? We're going to do another Kibeho. We're going to do it in Congo. And that happened in Kasese. That is story 106 in the book. It's the last story in the book. The survivor that shared this story survived in Kasese. And so the Kibeho massacre is still today haunting people. And again, what we're saying here, you can't say it in Rwanda. If any survivors of the Kibeho massacres or any of these massacres that were committed by the RPF, they cannot talk about them in Rwanda. If they did, they'll end up like one of the more famous genocide survivors in Rwanda, Aimable Karasira. This man lost a sibling during the genocide. And, his family, according to his own story, he said his family was all Tutsis, and the rest of them survived the genocide. But then after the genocide, his mother, his sister, his father were killed. He was left with a brother. Today, he's shared a little bit of his story. And because he shared his story, the Rwandan government has imprisoned him. He has been in prison for, we're in June, right? June 5. 2 years now. He's been in pre-trial detention. He's been to court a few times, and every time they haven't really done anything about releasing him so he can go out and live his life. They disrupted his life, like from being a university professor and a musician and a YouTuber, and now they have him in torture chambers in Rwandan prisons. That's what would happen to people who survived these massacres if they were to share these stories inside of Rwanda. So I say that to say, shout out to the people in Rwanda who shared their stories in this book. One of the things that Delphine talked about was the difficulty of putting the book together. Part of it was making sure that people are safe, because if somebody shares certain details, they can track them down and find them. So shout out to everybody that took care to make sure the stories were transferred and they were made to make sure that everybody's safe. And thankfully, everybody that shared the stories that's in Rwanda is still safe.
And shout out to you, for talking about this here. Again, this book is not for the fainted heart, but it's very important that we learn about that. Yes, I'll take Mrs. Sane, and then after then you.
Okay, my name is Sane. I'm fellow at AFGN. Yeah, so you guys, congratulations. You made a great move. I have a lot of questions. I don't know by which one start, but I'm concerned about the future of Rwanda itself. That's my first big view for this country. What will happen later, or no, after Kagame? How do you see it? Another concern I have also is the fact that I am a Catholic priest, but I'm very critical against the church. There is a lot of hypocrisy around this question. I have been living with some Jesuit friends, but they don't share the things with the same lights. Some are Tutsi, some are Hutu, and the way they are sharing the narratives, you cannot put them together and have them share something like what you did. I like the connections you made with Uganda, with the Congo, and also seeing all of that with the lenses of Western imperialism. So my second question is about what is your view about the church? What are you expecting about all of these institutional big things there? But people who are missing what I call the prophetic voice, like people like you, through this book. And my last question is about yourself. How do you protect yourself? Knowing that the people there in Rwanda, they are also here. Yeah. And the guy who is there has a lot of years. Yeah. How do you protect yourself? I don't know if there is any place in this planet where Kagame cannot send some people. So I stop here and yes, yeah. But thank you very much for your.
I'm going to ask each one of you to, but I'll just leave it open. Who wants to go first? You want to go first?
Yes.
Okay, sure. And then
Sure.
thank you.
Thank you so much. It's hard to find answers. We can talk for a long time. I will start with the future of Rwanda. I will talk in terms of, because part of what I do, I mean, we all sort of, we've co-authored, but we all have other things that we do. We have so many hats that we wear. And part of what I do in terms of Rwandan survivor stories is listening. So I do mental health kind of focus, and I talk about mental health as well. In terms of Africans, we don't talk about mental health. And so I do lots of work in terms of listening and encouraging people to actually talk, because mental health is real. What we've seen, no one should have to live with it, especially if you're not allowed to talk. So in terms of future of Rwanda, I will talk about that healing part, and Claude can talk about the other parts. So I'm worried about future of Rwandans as well, because there's so much that they're holding inside, and there's a lot of let me call them side effects, or some reactions, that things that will happen in terms of it affects the mental health it's not talked about, that's not addressed. It affects every other part, the leadership, the society, the development, absolutely everything, the future generations. So that's very worrying in terms of, after you asked after Kagame. I don't know in terms of what I do, because I listen to stories and I try to help people to heal. I said, look, when that happens, I won't be available, because there's no way you can. The capacity of people who will be talking and what they'll be talking about will be so hard to hear and so hard to help, because everyone will start talking. Now people cannot talk, like we were saying before. You were told that you survived something, you've witnessed it, but you cannot talk about it. Or you can talk about some parts and then you cannot talk about that. You cannot heal with that. So I'm worried about future of Rwanda in terms of that healing, because so people have anger, people have trauma, people have the others, and once it's like a ticking bomb. Once it's exploded, I don't know what's going to happen. So that's very worrying. Just moving a little bit fast, the different views. So you see that you can have, so many Rwandans in one room. Okay, to start with, every story is different, because the way I lived, my story is different from my sister, my brother. It's different. So that's one. But in the context of Rwandans, especially right now, people have to be mindful of those ears, those eyes that are watching them, because you are allowed to talk about some certain things, but you're not allowed to talk about others. So I wouldn't be surprised, for example, for your friends, you're saying, if they were talking in public, or if they're sitting next to each other, they can have different versions from if you spoke to them individually. That tells you that people are worried. Even in Rwanda, you cannot gather. Like, for example, when you 2 or 3, you cannot gather on the street. They will say that you're planning something, you're planning a coup or something. They cannot allow you to do that. Even people that are scared, they cannot even talk. They'll be like sort of really watching their backs. That's how the system's built at the moment. People are so scared. People have so much fear that they can't even, some people, they even think, or maybe they're even watching what I'm thinking. They even want to think. That's how bad it is. So I wouldn't be surprised maybe to experiment in terms of what they can say when there's other people around and what they can say when they're by themselves. So it's built on those fears, especially for priests, if they have to move around. One day they'll be affected in Rwanda. They don't want to talk because if there's word that they've said anything, they may get in trouble. So those dynamics are real for Rwandans. There's a lot we can talk about it, but that's a reality, about our protection. Just briefly, I'll talk about these are real for every day. For example, our community in Australia, like all the way in Australia, far from Rwanda, there's trouble for us who have been vocal, who have refused to be silent about injustices, who have refused to talk. We are persecuted. My own family, we are persecuted, and we are like, there's lots of stuff, and they actually threatening you. They're like, we'll do this to you, whatever. But I guess it got to a point where, we've seen a lot. There was so many seconds for me, or for so many Rwandans, that it could have been the last second. There's a reason why I survived. I did not survive to shy. I did not survive to keep silent. I did not survive to sort of stop talking about what I've survived. So we get to a point, obviously we have to sort of be we have to be careful, but we have to speak out as well. We cannot just watch. We cannot just sit in silence. We cannot just, that's what the system wants. They want us to be scared, so scared that we can't even talk, and we don't want that. I want Claude to.
Thank you so much. Claude, do you want to just maybe
respond
to this?
So what's going to happen after Kagame is one person. The RPF is a criminal enterprise that started in Uganda in 1987. They celebrated their 35-year anniversary recently. So Kagame is one person. He's a horrible person. He's a mass murderer. For me, he's the Hitler of Africa. And his RPF are the Nazis of Africa. But if he's replaced with somebody who has a similar, if the RPF system stays, the exploitation is going to continue. The repression inside of Rwanda is going to continue, and the exploitation in the region, and the belligerents all over the continent. Rwandan troops, as I was saying, Kagame is serving as the local mercenary for the West. Rwandan troops are in Mozambique today to protect French interest with the Total multinational, the oil company. Rwandan troops are in the Central African Republic. Rwandan troops were in Sudan, in Haiti, as far as Haiti, just right close to here. You fly them all the way here because they are really good mercenaries. So if he's replaced with somebody similar, if there isn't fundamental and radical change is what is needed in Rwanda and the whole region. And if he's replaced with somebody similar, it's going to be a similar result. However, what's happening now is really creating a fertile ground for further violence. When you stop people from talking, people from actually having their own rights, people will find ways to do it violently. That is inevitable. And so what is happening today, unless there is fundamental and radical change, and people are using very creative ways to avoid violence and to prevent violence. And these are people of goodwill. However, it's at every turn, the Kagame and RPF system continue to make it impossible, and their Western sponsors are empowering them with more money, more weapons, more soldiers, just in December of last year, the whole world, and today still, is calling out Rwanda's invasion of the Congo. And they were saying, you know, the Rwandan government is wrong for invading the Congo, yet the European Union gave $20 million to Rwandan troops, and they said it was for the to support the troops in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. But guess what? When you give resources to a mass murderer, they just move around the other resources so they can continue killing the people in the Congo. So until there is a disruption, a real disruption in the system, and then we are looking at, you know, a lot of work to get the change that we actually need. The role of the church itself, I think the church is complicit in the violence and what's happening, because when you don't speak, when you see an injustice and you stay silent and or you align with it, you are complicit in it. And the leadership of the church in Rwanda has shown themselves to be aligned with the regime. And so they are just that corrupt. And as far as protecting myself, it's very extensive, but you can see the need for it. If you just check my my timeline, my social media timeline, you'll see why there is a need for it. Kagame does have a long arm, and a violent one. They trap people. You know, I went to a place, and when I got out of an airport, there was a person holding a sign with my name. And I already had plans, you know, so, you know, I went past the person, and then I asked the driver, can you go back in there and take a picture of that person that has a sign with my name? So this is real. And they go out and they'll kill people, they'll kidnap people, they'll do all kinds of things. But part of protecting ourselves, in fact, is being public and sharing what we do. Doing this publicly actually protects us more than being silent, because a silent person, if they kidnap them, nobody's even going to suspect it. People have left the US, they're US citizens, have gone to Rwanda thinking because they haven't spoken, haven't done anything, they're fine, and they end up in torture chambers. And the US government has had to intervene to have those people released on multiple occasions. So there is a need, but it's very extensive the way it's done.
And thank God you have this very extensive security system. We pray it continues to work. Now, let me just, before the next questions, it's 1:36. Part of what we were planning to do was to reserve 30 minutes so that we can get these books. I want to get one myself and signed, and I guess our host only have us here for 2 o'clock. Now, before I take additional questions but we will do another maybe few minutes just to make sure we get some few questions in. Let me just be gracious enough to our online audience. They've been very patient. I'm going to throw in a few questions.
You mean on the phone or on the Zoom?
Okay.
Which?
So who wants to come in?
Yeah, but it doesn't have a
this one?
microphone next to it, which means he didn't pick the option to.
Okay, has he? Okay, I thought this.
Sorry.
He's still connecting.
Is he connecting?
Yeah,
he's still connecting.
Take the questions until he's connected.
Yeah, he is. Well, from what I'm seeing.
Maybe that's why the microphone's.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
We can
Do you want to go to the next questions?
I think so, and then we can wait for his connection.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why the microphone.
So just let me know when he's connected. All right. Okay, so I'm going to take online questions, and if you guys, I would like you to just, maybe.
It's on now.
Is he ready? Oh, okay, he is. Mr. Kitenga? Can you speak? Okay. All right. So we missed you, but we are happy you are in. Do you want to just step in and maybe make a brief statement that you already prepared before? And do you need an interpreter?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead. And just so you know, Mr. Kitenga is a renowned activist, and he is the president for Lotus Group is based in Kisangani in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm pretty sure that's where he's connecting from. He's also a member of several organizations, and he will speak a little bit about the victims' efforts in pursuing justice. Go ahead.
The interpreter has to tell him what you're saying, otherwise he won't know.
Oh, okay. That was just his bio. So he could start talking.
Ask the interpreter to tell you to explain to him what you're saying.
Oh, no, I don't speak French.
Allez-y, Monsieur Kitenge. José?
Oui,
Oh.
je suis là, je suis là.
Oui, oui. On est prêt.
Alors, bonjour.
Oui, on est prêt.
Alors, bonjour.
Oui, yes, hello.
Hello, oui, bonjour. Je salue donc tous les participants et voilà les orateurs et les organisateurs. C'est un réel plaisir pour moi de pouvoir participer à cette réunion afin de donner ma modeste expérience et ma contribution sur l'accompagnement des victimes des guerres et des grands et des grandes atrocités.
Monsieur Kitenge, vous pouvez me permettre d'interpréter, s'il vous plaît?
Merci.
Greetings to all the participants and speakers, and thank you for allowing me to come on this platform and also to share my participation. Allez-y.
OK. Donc voilà, aujourd'hui, à Kisangani, en République démocratique du Congo, on est en train de commémorer le 23e anniversaire de la guerre entre l'armée rwandaise et ougandaise à Kisangani et qui a fait plus de 1000 morts civils.
Today, here in Kisangani, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we are remembering the 23rd anniversary of the massacre that occurred in Kisangani by the Rwandan army that killed 1,000 civilians.
OK. Et cette commémoration-là, nous, particulièrement, moi qui vous parle, en tant qu'Edismans et en tant que groupe Lotus, nous avons beaucoup contribué à la documentation de ces crimes qui sont des crimes de guerre, crimes contre l'humanité, des destructions des populations. Nous les avons documentés puisque nous étions témoins des événements et en même temps, nous étions victimes puisque notre maison a été touchée, on a perdu des membres de famille.
Yeah, and for those crimes that happened then in Kisangani, I, Dismas, who is the president of Lotus, we contributed so much to the documentary that showed the massacres, especially because not only we were witnesses, but we were also victims because our home was impacted.
Et alors, aujourd'hui, pour ne pas monopoliser la parole, et nous accompagnons, mon organisation accompagne les victimes. Accompagne les victimes à s'organiser d'abord en association de victimes, ensuite à réclamer leurs droits, le droit à la justice, le droit à la vérité, le droit à la réparation.
Yes, and today, not to take over the moment, I just want to say that our organizations, we support the victims. We support the victims to claim the justice, but also reparation.
OK. Alors, justice, la vérité aussi pour savoir le droit à la vérité, puisque la plupart des victimes et la société en général ne sait pas pourquoi les deux armées rwandaises et ougandaises se sont battues à Kisangani, mais aussi le droit à la réparation de la part des belligérants et de la part de la communauté internationale pour aider les victimes à avoir l'indemnisation, à avoir aussi le droit sous une autre forme de réparation.
Yes, so we accompany the victims because truth needs to be told, because so many people, especially the international community, they don't know exactly the reason why the Ugandan army and the Rwandan army fought those 6 days. So the victims want the truth to be told, but they also are asking for reparation from those who started the war.
Alors, si aujourd'hui à Kisangani et au Congo, qui devait être un jour commémoré au niveau national en mémoire de ces nombreuses victimes, ça devait être un jour férié où tout le monde, mais malheureusement, ce n'est qu'à Kisangani où les victimes se sont recueillies, la société civile qui les a accompagnées. Mais dans d'autres villes de la RDC, le problème n'est même pas évoqué, même pas les autorités au niveau national, le gouvernement, le parlement n'a pas fait de cette journée une journée véritablement de commémoration.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that today in Kisangani, we are remembering what happened, the massacre that happened, but this day is not even acknowledged by the Congolese governments. They don't even talk about it. The other cities and towns in Congo are not aware of it. It's just here in Kisangani, the civil society and the victims are the ones that are gathering together just to commemorate, to remember what happened on this day 23 years ago.
Donc, c'est dommage que cette journée-là n'est pas vraiment commémorée, même au niveau international, de la communauté internationale des Nations Unies. On n'a pas évoqué cette journée aujourd'hui. On n'a même pas observé une minute de silence en mémoire des victimes.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we are commemorating this day here in Kisangani, and it's just here. But elsewhere, they're not even talking about it on the international level, even by the UN. They're not even talking about, they didn't even take 1 minute just to remember the victims of that massacre.
Alors, pour faire bref, donc aujourd'hui, les victimes, depuis 23 ans, attendent la justice, que les personnes qui ont commis ces crimes-là, au niveau de deux armées, au niveau de l'armée ougandaise et au niveau de l'armée rwandaise, avec leurs complices des Congolais, mais au niveau aussi de leurs États au plus haut niveau, que ces personnes-là soient jugées, qu'elles soient poursuivies pour les crimes de guerre, crimes contre l'humanité qu'ils ont commis.
Yeah, so those victims are still waiting. They have been waiting for justice for 23 years, that those perpetrators, those who caused those massacres, both the Ugandan armies and the Rwandan armies at the highest level, that they need to pay for those crimes. They need to be judged at the international level so that these victims can receive justice.
Donc, il n'y a pas de justice jusqu'à aujourd'hui, 23 ans. Personne alors des auteurs de ces crimes n'a été poursuivi en justice, n'a été jugé, n'a pas été condamné.
There has never been justice for 23 years. The perpetrators, the people who caused those massacres have never been brought to justice. No one has ever been judged or condemned.
Et au contraire, la plupart des auteurs, au niveau de la RDC, les Congolais qui ont participé à la commission de ces crimes, nombreux sont dans les institutions politiques. Il y en a qui sont dans le gouvernement, et il y en a qui sont dans l'armée, il y en a qui sont dans le Parlement, il y en a qui sont dans les entreprises publiques. Et le président actuel, à qui nous avons eu confiance, malheureusement les a nommés aussi. Nous avons les cas de Jean-Pierre Bemba, nous avons les cas de Mbusa Nyamwisi et d'autres encore.
Yeah, unfortunately, even those Congolese people who participated to those massacres, who are who are accomplices, the justice have never been done. Some of those people have been promoted into higher position in the countries. They're in the parliament, they're in the military, they're in politics. He gave example like Mbusa Nyamwisi and Bemba. Those people have been promoted, but no one has ever been brought to justice.
Donc, c'est l'impunité totale. C'est l'impunité totale. C'est même avec les autorités actuelles, c'est une prime à l'impunité qu'ils ont donnée à ces gens avec leur promotion.
Yeah, it's a complete impunity. It's complete impunity. Even the people that we called names, they have been promoted for their wrongdoing, for their impunity.
Mr. Kitenga, instead in the interest of time, can you maybe like in 30 seconds, just make your last summary? Sure, thanks.
Kitenga, à cause du temps, vous pouvez déjà conclure?
Je peux conclure donc, aujourd'hui, la communauté internationale et les autorités congolaises n'ont pas rendu justice à toutes ces victimes, n'ont pas rendu justice aux crimes qui ont été commis. On a l'impression de double standard. Donc, une justice pour d'autres pays et pas de justice. Ce qu'on veut privilégier, c'est seulement la réparation. Or, il n'y a pas de paix véritable. Il n'y a pas de réconciliation entre les États sans la justice.
To conclude, I just want to say that there has not been any justice. They have not been, these people, these perpetrators were not brought to justice. It's a complete impunity. No one has been brought to justice. They are talking about reparation, but there can never be peace if there is no justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Merci, Mr. Kitenga, and thank you for interpreting, Mr. Kitenga. Thank you for that contribution. Merci. I need to just acknowledge HMG Network for broadcasting this live and making it available throughout the world so that people can actually hear these stories uncensored. Thank you so much, HMG. And I apologize again for not saying that at the beginning. Now, what I wanted to do just briefly, I know we are way behind time and we want to really start signing these books. I'm just going to take 2 questions online and you guys each maybe might respond to that. And the way I want you to respond to that, if you don't mind, is also if you can just summarize it by just highlighting one thing in the book that really is memorable to you, that you think like people will walk away from as we buy our books to read them. Okay, so there are quite a lot of questions here. I will take 2 and or maybe 3, and then you guys can just briefly respond to them. There's a question coming, and I'm going to start from the most recent one from Mr. Frank Hammond. Mr. Hammond's question says, can you describe the activities of the United States Embassy in the DRC and or Horn of Africa? Is the US AFL-CIO Solidarity Center active in the Horn of Africa? Which one of you would want to take that? Do you want to record that? You can just write that down. I'm reading all of them, and then you can just go over that. Then Janet Sullivan, her question is, how has the suppression of the truth affected how children are taught in schools? Yeah. Would you want to talk about that? Yeah. Okay, let me see if there's 1 or 2 more questions related. You can just note that down and then briefly summarize. There's a question, it says, Anonymous, what is the role of the youth and social media in either calling for peace or exacerbating the problem? What hope you do see for the future? How to engage youth for peace and peaceful transformation? Who wants to, since you're talking about peace, would you connect that one? And then the final one will be for you. Again, there are quite a lot of questions. I'm just going to take the last 4 in the interest of time. And we do appreciate all of our online guests. Let me see one of the questions and the book title. Hold on 1 second. Okay. This is coming from Lily Mary Drisiru. It says, thank you for the informative and painful truth. One of the presenters rightly cried, no more weapons to Africa. How can we develop anti-military weapon campaign in Africa? This too is my deep reflection. So you take the question on military and the US involvement, and you take, you wrote it? It sounds, yes. Yeah. There we go.
I was gonna yield to Salome.
Oh, Salome, okay.
For this,
okay, would you
develop anti-militarism?
Actually, it speaks to
Alliance or peace is.
Salome, I'm sorry, we'll get that to you since you're online, and it sounds like I really missed that part. Salome will answer the 3rd question. Yes. It sounds like speaks to her presentation. Would you want to go first, Salome, so that we end up with you guys, since she hasn't spoken in a while?
Yeah, I can go first. Could you repeat the question?
Go ahead. So the question was weapons. It says no more weapons in Africa. How can we develop anti-military weapon campaign in Africa?
That's a great question because the Black Alliance for Peace has a campaign called Shut Down AFRICOM. And those who don't know AFRICOM, Africa Command Program, it's a program of the US government to basically have various military bases, various contracts throughout the continent. So far, every country except for Eritrea has a contract with AFRICOM. And through AFRICOM, atrocities such as what we've spoken about today are able to happen. And the Shutdown AFRICOM campaign is to shut down militarization by the West on the continent. And many groups throughout the continent are involved. And yeah, so a campaign that exists already that we could look at is the Shutdown AFRICOM campaign by the Black Alliance for Peace, that folks can look into, see how to support, and connect with groups on the ground that are actively doing work to combat AFRICOM and shut it down, so that we can determine our own futures as Black African peoples. But yeah, that's what I have for that.
Thank you so much, Salome. Would you want to go next?
Yes. Thank you so much. The following people who are following online. So in terms of, I'll sort of ask these questions, they are kind of related in terms of the suppressed truth and how in schools, what are the effects or what are the consequences, and the youth, how can they participate in the whole process in the justice and just to telling the stories. This is a very, I will talk about Rwanda because at the moment, or sort of in the recent years, they've been, let me call it brainwashing the young people in terms of that there are organized military trainings, but they're not military trainings. Like before you go to uni, after you finish high school, there's a compulsory training that you have to go to. And this is supposed to be like a civil kind of like to teach sort of skills, like normal skills, but there's also a part of telling them the story. Unfortunately, they've suppressed some narratives that actually are Rwandans. Like for example, a young person who come, they know what they've lived, they know what their family's been through, but they were told that that's not true. So it's confusing the young people, and it's like a systemic failure to tell the truth. So this is something that everyone can participate, because now it's hard because the system that's teaching, the system that's planning the teaching, they're the ones who are purposefully misleading or misinforming the young people. That's a whole system, and the consequences, like we'll see young people who are developing this anger. For example, what Claude was talking about earlier, the young people who grow up thinking Hutus are animals, Hutus are killers and everything. A young person who's born in a Hutu family, they'll feel like they hate their family, they will hate where they're coming from. There's all these identity issues, there's a lot of consequences for that. And the young person who's Tutsi or otherwise, they will be hating their friends, even without knowing their story, without that young person being involved in anything whatsoever. So it's developing a hate, it's developing anger, it's developing a lot of internal issues for young people. And it's very dangerous. Again, coming to a question we talked about earlier, it needs a whole system change. It needs a whole system change in terms of, you need to tell the truth. It's ugly, it's painful and everything, but you need to tell the whole truth. That's the bottom line. So it fits into this one in terms of youth participation. Again, can you imagine a young person who's confused about the history? They're confused about their identity. They hate who they are. So there's a lot of internal conflict, internal things going on. So getting them involved into justice without telling them the truth, without telling them actually the right way to pursue justice, to pursue truth, to pursue true reconciliation, to heal, is not going to happen. So how can we get the young people participating, telling them the truth, tell our stories, because every story matters. Acknowledging that it's not easy, some heavy things to take in, but you need to know that to the level, of course, to the level they are able to understand, and to accompany them through that. Because this story, when you're telling them, we need to accompany people, because people are shocked, people are traumatized, people are, all of this emotion happening. So just telling the truth is the bottom line, and knowing that we need justice for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. The truth and justice, the bottom line. Mr.
That's right. That's the basis.
Sure.
Just wanted to do, I'm going to be really brief, but a quick acknowledgement. We have Dr. Claudine Kradusenge McLeod, who's done research on these things, and she's in the audience. So hopefully you don't mind, Dr. McLeod.
sharing some of your work with the audience and possibly with the online audience. So just wanted to share that. Now, as far as US involvement in the Horn of Africa, I want to really just to make it brief and paint the picture, I want to use Ethiopia.
Okay.
Ethiopia was ruled for many years by a ruthless group called the TPLF. RPF, TPLF, you know, sounds, they do similar things. It's almost like a copy paste of what they do in the Horn of Africa and in the Great Lakes region of Africa. This group was brutal, killed hundreds of thousands of people in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia, one of the most populous countries on the continent. And they received so much aid. There was a narrative about how they were such a good development story with 8% growth, annual growth. Rwanda too claims 8%. It's like same template. And the US praised them, funded them and everything. In I believe it was 2018 that they were out of power. And then 2020, they started a war to take over again. And they started losing the war, and the US got involved. They brokered a peace deal in South Africa, in Johannesburg. After the peace deal, the Ethiopian government basically, in my view, betrayed the people. And now they have removed the terrorist designation off of the TPLF, which has been terrorizing the Ethiopian people for the last 30 years. And yet it wasn't more than 15 years ago that Mandela lost his terrorist designation from the US, right? But they did it so quickly, removed the TPLF from the list of terrorists. The TPLF is now part of the government. The people of Ethiopia are still getting killed. And if it wasn't for the arm of the US and the involvement of the US, I believe the TPLF will be done at this point, and the Ethiopian people could sort themselves out. But the government of Ethiopia has now decided to turn and betray the people who were a part of the fight against misinformation and everything, to now being in coalition with the group that was killing the people, still killing the people, and the killings are still going on. So that's the picture that I would like to paint. If you go to Somalia, go to Djibouti, and all these other places, the same. Africom in Djibouti, you know, it's one of they're like the places where they're really, really present. So let me stop it there.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Claude. And I'm sure maybe this might be one of the appropriate way. There are quite a lot of questions, and I know for the audience, we are going to sign books, so you might use that opportunity as well, especially for those of you who wanted to ask questions, to meet our esteemed co-authors here. And two, we have, I just want to thank Ms. Salome, and who is online, and who you were gracious enough with your time, and especially the way you were able to bring this dimension. And I want to thank Mr. Kitenga, who, even though despite he had some technical difficulties, you still tried at the last moment to still join and make a very, very powerful statement, especially in terms of how you contributed to getting these testimonies out. And for you, I mean, thank you so much for this wonderful and very, very powerful statement. I'm particularly grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, and for our audience, please tell them, how will they get the book? How will they get the book, since they're not
those who are online, you can find the book on
Amazon?
On Amazon. It's yeah. So they're sharing the link in chat.
Okay.
And for those on YouTube, you can just go to Amazon and look for Survivors Uncensored. That's one way to get it. It's about $25 online and also here. Yeah.
Okay. It's not very expensive for what you're going to get.
Yeah, for French speaking, you can look for Survivre par la parole.
Okay. So for our French speaking audience, you have an alternative. So with that, I want to thank the audience who joined us virtually. Thank you for, we went a little bit behind time, but we're going to have a real good fellowship here, signing books, and there's lunch behind there. I want to thank you all so much for taking time off on a busy Monday afternoon to be here. Thank you so much. And thanks to our host.
Thank you.